and very mature trees. So the memories, and why I'm here. The first memory I have still creeps me out. So mind you, there are no roads, no inhabited houses, nothing built or done to this area because of land division dispute and some will/deed problems of the family who owns the land, and apparently it's been this way for over 150 years. Just forest. My sister and I were out playing in our backyard near the property line, where the creepy-ass, falling down little prairie-looking house was, when she spotted an old woman in the house. The front of the house was broken down, and you could clearly see into it. It had 2 stories, kind of like a cutaway from a dollhouse where you could take off the front and see all the rooms. Allegedly, this 70 to 80-year-old woman was just sitting in a green lawn chair, watching us from the 2nd-story loft. We were young, maybe 8. We didn't really notice some of the more peculiar aspects of this scene. We'd been playing for a few hours and would have seen someone walk by carrying a green lawn chair, because we had a clear view of the house, and you couldn't really get to it unless you either came from our yard or you hiked through a lot of wood. An elderly woman dragging a lawn chair up a rotted-out ladder to the 2nd story of a rotted-out loft, and just chilling there watching me and my sister. So of course my sister goes and says hi, finds out she speaks, and said she used to live in that house a long time ago. She looked fairly normal for an old person, but the face was indistinct to me, like I couldn't really get a solid look at it for some reason. I got uncomfortable and said bye to the creepy old lady, and left, where I basically grabbed my sister and we returned to the house. Now this bothers me, because no one has lived or been living in this area for nearly 150 years. No one could have, or should have been living there. There were no records of it or anything. Also, I knew for a fact that there is no road nor trail or anything that goes to the old house, even now thanks to Google Earth. So how did this old woman just appear and disappear? Because as we were walking back to the house, I glanced back at the property line about 80 yards back to the old house and the green chair, which was still there. But the old lady was gone. She didn't pass by us, didn't hear her climb down, nothing. Clear line of sight, early afternoon, not overcast, very well lit. She was simply gone. I did some research from when I had to steal stuff next door for school, and couldn't find a similar person on my street, or the next, or even in the neighborhood. So to this day I still have no clue what happened there. The second memory. This happened a few times in middle school, but sometimes when I was walking home from the bus stop at the end of the street. The tree line and underbrush along the backyards of the house that bordered the creepy forest started to have glowing red dots in sporadic clusters, and resembled to me eyes like tiny orbs of red dull light that appeared along the underbrush, and followed me home. I thought it was maybe berries, but no. I hiked through that area with my brothers. No berries or red anything, ever. Not holly, or seasonal fruiting bushes or animals, because we had some foxes, deer, and squirrels. That's about it. I couldn't explain it, then nor now. I just remember running home whenever I saw the lights in the underbrush, along the tree line, and would hide in my house as fast as I could. The one time I was brave enough to go up to the bushes, the lights disappeared before I even got close. No sound, no wind, nothing but a cold chill, which at the time was weird, as it was late spring or early autumn in Tennessee when it happened to me, and it stays pretty damn warm usually. I couldn't ever find any evidence as to what it was. No red berries or critters, or some wackadoo raving around red Christmas lights. Yet this memory still gets to me. My third memory. Why do I feel like I'm being watched? So my old house was old. Well, 30 years or so. Never really got the cold spots or the other classic signs that someone's making up stuff about having a paranormal encounter. But every now and then when I was alone, maybe the basement usually, or occasionally outside in the woods. I got the sensation someone or something else was there. And every time before I felt the sensation, I started to get afraid a little first, then full on mad dash away in full adrenaline mode whenever I realized what I was feeling. This happened more than I liked. I hated it and thought I was losing my mind. Mind you, I didn't do any drugs, prescribed or otherwise, and even didn't start drinking till college. I couldn't explain it, and it didn't fit panic attack symptoms or anything similar. I'd been checked out and looked at, examined my medical records, but couldn't find anything from a biological perspective. There are a few more jarring experiences as well that happened to me, and I'm going to share these with you now. There was another occasion where I was tromping around the woods and felt like I was being forcibly turned around. My brother and I spent a good deal of our first 5 to 7 years at that house going in the forest, hiking around with no problems, usually, or how we all just stopped when we got close to high school age. And I chalked it up to us having other things to do, girls, sports, friends. Then I remembered arguably our last trip, and my second to last trip into that forest. My last trip made me never go into those woods again. Thinking back, maybe there's a reason why no one wants to develop the woods, or why the owners won't sell to anyone. I even checked. Even if the forest is prime real estate South Nashville worth millions of dollars, probably because we were kids or something. If we felt uncomfortable, we just didn't talk about it and cut trips short, so we ignored things. Except this trip that turned out to be our last group outing into the damn forest, because we were old enough to start knowing when things simply aren't right. Thinking back on those details through meditation and sorting through details with my brother, who didn't want to recall anything, seems like we made a conscientious decision to never speak of it again. Except I wanted answers. And here's the story. So, usual gorgeous late spring Tennessee weather that begs you to get outside and go for a hike into nature. My brother and I gear up for a Saturday excursion into the woods to explore past the old ruined smokehouse to the left side of the woods. We trek through the back of our property line into the woods proper, trekking a straight line using our compasses to go to this circular clearing of protruding limestone. As we got closer, it got quiet, almost silent except for us trailblazing. We get to the clearing, and my two brothers in front of me stop and look at the center of the stone clearing, where a raised circle outcropping of rock is about 150 feet. I can't really see much at the time, because I was still 4'0", and behind those behemoths I call family. We didn't even notice some important details at first, like how quiet it was, there being no flies or anything around, or the wax stripping around the center stone circle, making an odd star-shaped pattern, and that it feels like we're being watched, where the back of your neck hair has gone up, and you expect to turn around and see someone. My oldest brother goes up to the circle and just says, "Oh crap." I don't have a word, and my second brother starts to notice some of the weirdness about the outer part of the circle and goes to look. I, being the smallest, am curious, as all get out and go wander over to the middle where my oldest brother has gone a bit pale and is staring at something. I look past my older brother's shoulder and see on the top of the stone dies a lump of stuff. It is a disemboweled animal arranged strangely, but it wasn't eaten at all. It appeared to be a fox. I remember thinking it was strange because I couldn't smell it, and there were no flies or anything or signs it had been bitten open, just splayed there with its organs somehow around it, like a dissection. At this time, everyone started to notice everything else I mentioned. When we confirmed it was more than just one of us feeling like that, we started to hear what sounded like the wind through the trees, but nothing was moving. Not the grass, the plants, and the treetops, which we all knew to look at to figure out the wind direction. Then my eldest brother said, "We're going back right now," in a serious tone that I'd never heard him use before. So we all collectively buggered out and went back to the house as fast as we could. I overheard my older brother talking about sacrifice and that we're not going back, and to tell Mom, Dad, and the police. I was 12, so I didn't think much of it and was more concerned with hanging out with my friends later in the day. I couldn't just focus on the memories, or I didn't want to think about it. The last time in those woods for me was this memory. Fast forward 2 to 3 months, and I'm doing a small hike through the woods alone, maybe 400 meters back from the tree line that borders the neighborhood. I wanted to move parallel to the road so I could get back easily by cutting out a right angle and walking back on the street to my house. 10 minutes into this, I start to turn right to go towards the street to get back in time to leave for the beach vacation with my mum and sister. That's when I felt it. The most uncomfortable and awful sensation I've ever felt in those woods. It was like I was being watched coldly, and it was getting closer. I never scared or spooked easily as a kid, and especially in woods. My background is important, as I was basically in various national parks every other weekend camping with my scout troop. I've been through solo orienteering courses day and night in all seasons to earn merit badges, and I don't freak out then, and when I was younger. But this time, I was spooked hard. I turned around and looked everywhere around me. It was very quiet, too quiet for Tennessee woods. If you've ever been to the southeastern US in summer, go anywhere near nature, you'll understand what I mean when I say it's never quiet. I yelled out tentatively, thinking it could be another person. God, I was hoping it was a person. Then it just got silent. And no, not any normal silence, like the kind where you can hear your own breathing. I freak out and bolt out those woods as fast as I can, and ended up getting the worst case of poison ivy in my life, and had to be stated and put on steroids. I never went back to those woods after that. I'm 23 now. This started when I was 3 or 4. Everything that happened that night, I remember like it was yesterday. The memory so vivid and forever in my mind. The second floor of my house at the time was really just a small landing with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom off it. Immediately at the top and to your right was my bedroom. The bathroom adjacent to the stairs, then my sister's bedroom, and my parents' bedroom. My mum would put my sister and I to bed at 7 o'clock every night. I always had issues falling asleep as a kid, but would eventually drift off. My bedroom had a closet next to the door, and next to that, 2 windows with a dresser sitting between them, with my bed pushed against the wall, foot end of the bed near the door. One night, not unlike any other, we're put to bed and I finally find sleep after a few hours of just lying there, only to wake up some hours later. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning. I rolled over to scan my room. I've always been afraid of the dark, so the room was lit up, and my nightlight was plugged in at the end of the bed. Standing in front of the window furthest from me, near the closet, I saw what I thought at the time was an angel, quite literally glittering gold in front of my eyes, standing at least 7 feet tall, staring out the window. My movement must have grabbed its attention, because immediately its head turned to look at me. There were no facial features except for a strong, defined jawline, though faceless. It wasn't like a freaky facelessness. At this point, I was more curious than afraid. Then it started to yell at me. It kept telling me to shut up. The yelling quickly turned to screaming, and I freaked. I was one giant goosebump, and I got up from bed, opened my door, and looked into the lit hallway. My parents always left that light on at night in case my sister or I needed something or got scared in the middle of the night. Almost in slow motion, I noticed the air felt too still. Something was off. Before I could process anything, I took one step forward, and out of the bathroom shoots this thing. It gets right in front of my face, screaming a blood-curdling scream that still echoes in my ear to the day. The face of this thing was just grey and sinister, eyes completely blacked out, skin cracked, no lips, just a black hollow hole with the screams coming from it. Long, black hair flying around, as if there were a fan switched on behind it, and I lost it. I screamed so loud, I swear the entire house shook. I barged into my parents' room, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. My mum looked scared and confused. My dad, just terrified. I don't remember what happened after that. I'm sure I told my parents what happened and ended up sleeping with them for the next few weeks. Growing up, I asked my mum about that night, and she explained how I barged in crying, rambling off some story about an angel or something. Today, I don't know what it was. My dad, on the other hand, never said much about it, and instead started warning me to stay away from Ouija boards, and told me some freaky stories about things that had happened to him. As my parents divorced, growing up, things got worse, with respect to what I was being exposed to. My dad would show me scary pop-up videos and play creepy music. I was 6 or 7 at this point. Safe to say I hated going to my dad's, because I thought whatever I'd seen that night was somehow connected to him. Eventually my mum remarried. We moved and things were okay. Then I decided to stop seeing my dad completely, for unrelated reasons, as I was 9 years old at this time. And that's when things started again. The air was ridiculously heavy all the time. I hated sleeping in my room. I always felt like there was something at the end of my bed, just watching me. I tried to ignore it. For 9 years, constantly living in fear. We moved out of that house to somewhere around the corner. And once my mum and stepdad divorced, that way we wouldn't have to switch schools as I was about to graduate high school, and my sister still had 1 more year. I still had access to the house as my ex-stepdad still lived there. They were using my old bedroom for storage and always kept the blinds closed, as I had while living there. One morning when everyone in my old house was at work, my friend and I decided to sesh in the garage quickly. We had the okay from the ex-stepdad, so long as we weren't driving anywhere afterwards. We walked through the front door, through the foyer to the garage, and got settled. I could already feel the extra 10 pounds on my chest, and I really wanted to make this quick. I had previously spoken with my friend about what I was feeling in this house, as we had been friends for years at this point, but never gave her much context. Not even 5 minutes into the sesh, we heard the footsteps above the garage, i.e. my old bedroom. My entire body went cold. My friend immediately looked at me, and we waited for another second and heard them again. This time, like a stomp type, running around the room. We said screw it, packed up and got the hell out of there. I locked up and walked down the driveway completely freaked, trying to push the thousands of thoughts running through my mind out my head. Then, my friend let out a tiny shriek. I turned back to immediately ask her what was wrong. They were doing some work. I thought she could have stepped on a rogue nail or something, but the horror was written on her face, and I looked up at the window where the blinds were closed. I asked her again what was up. She said for whatever reason she felt like she needed to look up to my old bedroom. She said the blinds were open in the window looking down on us, and I quote her words, "This thing, with black hair and black eyes and cracked skin, and just a hollow black hole for a mouth, was staring down. She said it so fast, terror was oozing from every word she said. That's when she burst into tears, and so did I. I was too freaked out to tell her what happened when I was a kid, and I didn't want to scare her more. I suggested we get the hell out of there. Since then, nothing's happened. I recently traveled to Rome, specifically the Vatican, and got a blessed St. Michael pendant for extra measure, seeing as whatever it was followed me in silence throughout the years. The thing hasn't bothered me other than showing up in a very specific nightmare I've had every 8 to 10 years since my first encounter. If this thing is still on my tail, I'll be due for a nightmare within the next year. There's a locally famous haunted road in my town called Upsom Road. However, it is more commonly known as Green Lady Cemetery Road. You can look it up online. There have been tons of reports of incidents on this road. It's a hotspot. If you grew up in my town, you've been down Green Lady Cemetery Road. I could go on for days about telling you the stories I've heard from others about this location, but I would rather tell you about the 2 experiences I've had on this road. The second one made me swear to never go down it, day or night, again. The road had never been paved. They've left it terribly bumpy and as a dirt road to stop people from going down it. Most times of the year, the town puts up barriers so no one drives through it. Not because it's a walking path, because simply they don't want people going down there. At one end of the road, there is an old piece of property that the town bought, that you'll often see a police car sitting in. If you decide to pull onto the road, you'll be pulled over immediately and be told you're trespassing, even though it is in fact public property. They can't legally stop you from driving down there, but most people don't know that and will turn you around. The road starts off as just a wooded dirt road. It's only about a mile long, and you can drastically see a change of scenery in a very short amount of time. As you pass the wooded area, you come up to a section of road where on your right is a small swamp, and on your left is more forest. However, nothing seems to be able to live out there. When you hit this section of road, you're officially in the hot spot. If you park your car and look around, you'll notice that trees don't seem to grow there. They are all dead and rotten. You will not hear birds chirping. It's dead silent. Going just slightly further up the road, just past the swamp, is where things get very eerie. On the left-hand side of the road is a very, very old cemetery where the Green Lady stays. The headstones are all dated from the 17 to 1800s. There's also a small foundation next to the cemetery where a house used to stand. It's been reported time and time again that people have witnessed a green mist floating around the cemetery. People have seen this green mist form into the shape of a woman in a dress, walk back and forth around the cemetery. And there are a few theories as to who this woman is, but I'm not completely sure anyone knows exactly who she was. Anyway, it's a bit of a rite of passage here in town where every kid who gets their license drives down the road at night just one time to be able to say they've done it. Here are my 2 stories about it. When I purchased my first car, the first thing my friend Jordan and I did was take a drive down that road. I'd picked him up at his house at around 10:30 at night, and we drove over there. It had been extremely hot that day, and towards the night, it had rained a bit and cooled down a bunch. That combined with the swamp being on the road, it was so foggy you couldn't see more than 3 feet in front of you. It was absolutely the worst time to be driving down there, to be honest. We'd both been a bit nervous, and the fog wasn't helping us at all. We had been creeping down the road slowly, so we couldn't really see where we were going. We had gotten about 200 feet from the cemetery when a teenager comes running out of the fog and runs right past our car. We didn't recognize him, but this kid was bolting down the road. He was dressed in a grey Nike t-shirt and black baseball shorts. He looked like he was about our age, so we were even more confused that we didn't recognize him. Jordan and I both agreed that the kid looked like he was running away from something, so we decided to turn around to offer him a ride. Mind you, there is a ton of bears and other large carnivores here, so we thought perhaps something might be chasing him. I quickly turned the car around and started driving back in the direction the kid was running. We drove for a little bit but didn't see him. The fog had started to clear up a bit, so we were able to see a decent distance in front of us, but we still couldn't see him. He wasn't on the road. He wasn't in the forest. He was simply gone. I rolled down my window and started to yell, "Hey man, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" Hoping that the kid would pop out from behind a tree or something. But nothing. The kid was simply gone. Maybe he was some kid who decided to walk down that road at night and got spooked. Maybe he saw headlights and thought we were cops and hid from us. We still don't know to this day. We had asked around in school the next day if anyone knew of anyone who went for a walk down that road at night, but we never heard anything. If there was a kid out there that late and he ran up into the forest, that's even scarier than the thought of the ghost teen running past our car. I'll never forget the look on that kid's face as he ran past our car. He looked like he was scared, panicking, and I really wish I were able to find out who he was. Now for my second and final experience. Jordan, the same friend from the previous story, had gotten his first car, so obviously the first thing we had to do was go down the road. The weird thing about this drive is that once again as we got closer to the cemetery, a thick layer of fog had started to pour out of the trees from the swamp, although the weather had been the same all day. No rain and no temperature drops. Nothing. Luckily, this fog wasn't as thick as before, and we could see in front of us. We'd gotten up to the cemetery, and Jordan parked the car. We sat around for a little while and looked at the cemetery. The forest just observed everything. After 5 or so minutes, Jordan looks at me and says, "Dude, how weird would it be if I looked in the rearview mirror and there was someone in the seat?" Who says that? I mean, honestly, dude. Look where we are. It's not even a joke. That's seriously not.
O, seniukai, gyvas dar.
He looked up in the mirror and screamed. I spun around, looked in the back seat, and there was nothing there. He started laughing. "I got you, bro. Again, you're not funny, Jordan."
Kiek grauzi.
He didn't want to keep wasting the gas, so we turned off the car and shut off the headlights. Now this idiot has us sitting on a famously haunted road in the middle of the night, in the pitch darkness, surrounded by forest. We parked right in front of the old building foundation of the cemetery.
Riesutė.
We sat there for a few minutes, smoking cigarettes and talking about nonsense. I'm kind of staring off into the trees at this point, honestly a bit bored, when out of nowhere Jordan says, "Hey, there's someone in the forest."
Kokie este klausa.
I shrug it off, assuming he's messing with me, when I see a subtle light in the forest behind the cemetery. It looked like a flashlight with batteries that were as close to dead as they could be. The light vanished after a few seconds, and we both sat there with our eyes glued to the patch of forest. Roughly 30 seconds later, a tall, ovular light started to appear in the same spot that the light came from. Jordan says to me, "Okay, dude, I'm done. Let's go." And I'm telling him, "No, hang on, wait." His hands are on the key. He's getting ready to start up the truck and drive away. The light was very faded, a little hard to see, but when the forest behind it is pitch black, it stood out. It slowly started to move along the rock wall at the back side of the cemetery, and Jordan started up the truck. He was so ready to leave. As his headlights kicked on, we saw a green mist floating around the road. Jordan yells out, "Screw this," and slams the truck in reverse and backs up until he felt far enough away to turn around. We had always heard reports of the green mist. Supposedly, if you wait long enough, you'll see the green lady walk around in the mist. But we were too scared to wait for that to happen. I never thought the green mist was real until that night. And to this day, I swear I will never drive down that road ever again. I highly recommend you look it up. It's probably one of Connecticut's most famous paranormal hotspots. My mother and her cousins often played together as children, although as a rule none of them were supposed to be out after dark. One day when she was around 6 or 7 years old, she and 3 of her cousins were playing hide and seek. They were asked her what happened and why she had gone that deep into the forest. She explained what happened, noticing the terrified looks on the cousins' faces as they listened, while the adults became even more tense than they had already been. When she was done recounting her experience, her Uncle Simon told her that Linda had encountered someone she thought was Mama while she was hiding, only to realize it wasn't her. She had run screaming from her hiding place, telling him and the others what she'd seen. And when they found Mama's slipper, which she hadn't realized she'd lost while searching, Uncle Simon had told Linda's elder sister to take her and the other children to my grandparents. My mother and her cousins got quite a scolding for playing past sundown, but Mama always felt that it was worth it, since she wouldn't have been alive to tell the tale if Uncle Simon had gotten there a few minutes later. Ever since that night, she's always made sure to keep an eye on the sun when she has her cousins playing, so that they can go in before dark. The next story takes place in my father's ancestral home in his hometown, which is a place where no one wants to try and make a life beyond its boundaries. The house is now abandoned and lies in ruins. These events took place 3 to 4 years before he passed away. I was already an adult in my late 20s. I was temporarily staying there with my father while waiting for news on the various job applications I had sent out online, since my last job in the city had stressed me out so much my health had gone downhill, so I had to leave to recuperate. The house was already old and in the state of disrepair, and I have to tell you I was praying for the day that I could leave, because not only were we living a hand-to-mouth existence, but my father is domineering and has a controlling attitude. It was really grating on my nerves. He kept rubbing it in my face that we were surviving on his retirement pension, since I was too weak to hold the job for a year, and he even had the audacity to tell me that I should let him manage the inheritance from my late mother's estate once it was released. He wanted to use it to set up a business, mainly because he wanted me to live out my days in that dead-end town that he called home, where nothing happened and no one wanted to leave their comfort zone. What he didn't know was that I would never let him touch what was mine. I was basically the maid at home, doing all the cooking, cleaning, laundry, the works. I was also constantly being humiliated by our father to the relatives that we have and acquaintances, since I am and still mostly a loner, the only people I could really talk to being a few cousins who were also outcasts like me. He may have been my father, but he should never have been allowed to raise kids, since loving and nurturing has never been something he understood. It was always about control. You are his puppet, doing his bidding. As I mentioned, the house was old and falling into disrepair. At the time of this story that I'm about to tell you, it was no secret that the house was haunted, even when my grandparents and other cousins resided there during my high school days. But they aren't the ones I'm going to share with you. On many occasions I would see people walking through the house, but when I would turn to look at them, there was no one there. Passing visitors weren't just limited to human beings. Many times I even saw the animals. I had one come close to me, visit after their precious lives had been cruelly cut short, all in the name of finger foods that should have been eaten to go with the booze. It was almost as if my four-legged friends were coming to see me one last time before going to their eternal reward. And when I told my cousins, whom I was close to, about them, they said it was because those creatures remembered the kindness I had showed to them and knew that I loved them. There was one apparition in particular that seems to follow me around all the time, that of a little boy, about 3 years old. When I would be cleaning the yard, I'd see him from the corner of my eye sitting on a bench, or standing a few feet away watching me. However, he would be gone once I turned my head to look at him. Whenever I was in the kitchen preparing a meal, he would be peering at me from around the kitchen door. He was mostly a blurry figure, like what you see on the old TV screens when the signal's bad, and I could never see his face but knew he was there. Once around dusk, my father was out talking to his friends and I was upstairs folding the clothes that I had gotten off the clothesline since they were dry, when from the corner of my eye I saw that child, and he began to inch closer to me, as if curious as to what I was doing. I didn't feel threatened by him, and spoke to him gently, hoping that I could give him comfort in some way. The next day, I went to my cousin Leela's house. She and her siblings, along with their mother, Susan, are fellow outcasts like me, but for different reasons. Technically, they're paying for a sin that was committed by their matriarch. Susan is my eldest cousin on my father's side, so Leela and her siblings are my nieces. Leela, though, is my age, and Anna is 5 years my junior, but I look at them all as cousins, no big deal. I told Leela, her younger sister Anna, and their mother Susan about the little boy I kept on seeing, and they all became very quiet before exchanging a long look. Leela told me that it's known behind closed doors that Susan's half-sister Victoria had several extramarital affairs and many abortions afterwards. The latter were all performed at the ancestral house. They said that the little boy might be one of the children who paid for their mother's sins with their lives, and he clearly took a liking to me, because even though I'm not a mother, I've never hurt a child. That little boy was my constant companion when I wasn't visiting Leela up until June 2014, when I started a new job in a city almost 12 hours away from where my father lived. Leela and Anna were also able to start a new chapter of their lives in a city 13 hours away from that pit we were stuck to. 2 months after I left. We still keep in touch and remain close as ever, because in my eyes, they, along with the maternal uncle I have a soft spot, and my sister and her 3 children, are the only family I have left now. My father passed February 2016, and when I went to attend the funeral service and tie up the loose ends he had left, I saw the house had continued to deteriorate after I was gone, and I was glad. I had always felt like the life and whatever courage I had to try to hold on to after my mother died when I was 12 was being drained from me the entire time I'd stayed there. The house is now in ruins, completely abandoned, and the trees and plants that thrived when I was there have since withered. Let's set the background first. I grew up in a very rural area. My parents have a pretty big piece of land with a nice 2-story farmhouse in the middle of it. To the south of the house is a peach orchard. The west is where the driveway is. It goes through an alley of cottonwood and pecan trees, but the land is pretty open and was used for cattle farming. The east and north is dense woodland and shrubs, which reaches all the way to our neighbors about 2 miles. I was working at a coffee shop in town. So I was able to get there on my own. It was about an hour. We started fairly late in the day at about 10 a.m. The owner of the company was sort of a night owl and loved to sleep in. But because of it, we had to stay until 9 p.m. That was no problem in the summer, but turned out to be a bit of a nuisance in the winter, as it got dark pretty early.
Ой, ти супора какой-нибудь.
Because the
Bus
lights on my
Viveso.
car weren't the best anymore. I drove a 1987 Chevy
Lycket
pickup,
sträna.
which had obviously seen better days. I hadn't had much money back then, so this was all I could afford. So one day in late December, about 10 or 11 years ago, I left work much later than usual. I had made a pretty stupid mistake on a nightstand I was building for a customer and needed to fix it. as the customer was going to pick it up the next day. When I finally finished, it was about midnight. I cussed out my own stupidity, closed the shop up tight, and went to my car. There are two routes I can take to get home. One is on a highway, the other one is through the backcountry, and dirt roads surrounded by thick brush and trees. I usually took the highway, as it was much faster and safer, especially in the dark. But this day, there had been an accident, and the highway was blocked by emergency services, so I took the long way home. As soon as I left the main road and made my way up the dirt trails, I got this feeling, you know the one, as if something bad is about to happen, almost like impending doom. The longer I drove on the road, the stronger the feeling got, until it felt like all of my body and soul were aching desperately to turn around, drive back all the way to the roadblock, and wait until it got opened again. I tried to suppress it as best I could, and tried to convince myself that I had driven this route many times, and I knew that it was safe, albeit a bit rough on the truck. When I was driving through an especially rugged piece of brush, only about 10 miles from my parents' farm, all of a sudden, my left front tire popped. I did my best to keep the truck on the road and made it to a safe spot. I kept a spare tire in the toolbox and had changed tires quite a lot on my own, and I knew it would be just a minor inconvenience, and I would be rolling again in a matter of minutes. That's where I was wrong. I climbed up on the truck's bed, only to find that my toolbox had been broken into, and all of my tools and my spare tire had been stolen. So there I was, still miles away from the nearest settlement, in bear and wolf country, in the middle of the night with no cell phone, and no way to repair my truck. I always kept a sort of survival kit in my toolbox, with a blanket, a small axe, a fire starter kit, and some MREs. But it had been stolen too. Thank God I still had my trusty Paco, which my sister gave me when she moved to Finland. So I made the second, but bigger mistake on the day. I decided to walk home. To this day, I still don't know why I made this decision. All I had to do was wait in my truck until sunrise, and I knew a neighbor was driving this road every day at around 8 a.m. He could have taken me to town and called my parents to get the truck, but some stupid fart in my brain said, "Nah, we're walking." So I went. I locked the car, took my rucksack with my belongings with me, and began walking. I couldn't have walked far when I got this eerie feeling, like something or somebody is watching me. I turned around, but nothing was there. I picked up my pace to make it out, when all of a sudden I heard some rustling in the bushes to my left. I called out if there's someone there, but of course received no answer. The feeling of being watched got stronger and stronger as the rustling became more frequent, when suddenly the brush stopped and I came to a small clearing. That's when he spoke to me for the first time. "Hey there, boy." He had a pretty weird pronunciation. The first part was spoken softly, almost gently, but the boy was like an explosion in my ears. He made a tiny pause in between, and then spewed out boy. He was big, 6'6", wearing a long trench coat and hat. Grey, short hair with lifeless eyes, almost like that of a perished fish. But what really scared me was his dog. He had a huge, black, shepherd-like dog, but it looked very wild, almost like a wolf. I immediately froze with fear. I could never imagine it being like this. I couldn't move. I just couldn't. I tried. Trust me, God, did I try.
О, блядь.
What you doing there, boy? He asked.
Net esta įsigandau.
Boy? I still couldn't
Bus
move.
Jonai.
But my mouth slowly started to work again. I told him about the truck and how I
Ko
was
čia
trying
dasdinies?
to walk home. But I don't think he was able to understand a word that I was saying, as I was stuttering and
Весь логичный
slurring the
комментарий
words
справляющим
he
решила
could
духос.
say. He made few steps towards me, his dog fixated on me like prey. He came so close that I could smell him.
Это Джон Vienas с pabraukimo brūkšnys Phoenix
At the
94 nubult.
house with a big old wood-burning stove. Shortly after moving in, we found out that the lady that previously owned it was hit by a drunk driver
D.
and had to move into a care facility for the
Это Джон
severely
Vienas s
impaired.
pabraukimo brūkšnys Phoenix 94 palaukimu pasipildyt.
I
Neužtenka
immediately
spurgai.
realized I didn't quite like living in the mountains. The people in the town, especially our handful of neighbors, were really strange, paranoid and rough. There was just a negative energy there, especially in certain parts of the mountain. I was so in love with my then boyfriend though, that I wanted to make him happy, and knew how much he loved it there. So I didn't say
Eik
it.
pasipildyt greitkuliai slėk.
The first time I noticed the negative energy was about a week after we moved in. We went for a hike towards early evening. We wanted to explore the miles of wilderness behind our home and were excited. As we walked further along, we saw old abandoned ranches and log cabins. There was even one area that had some evidence of witchcraft. There were many local legends of a satanic cult that referred to themselves as goatmen. As we walked into a thickly wooded area, all the hair on my body suddenly stood up, and I noticed an electric charge in the atmosphere, along with the sizable deafening silence. I tried to ignore this creepy feeling and kept walking. A few minutes later, my husband stopped in front of me and said he had just realized we weren't on the trail anymore. We looked back, and sure enough, there was no trail in sight. The sun was now setting, and the scenery was disorienting. After about an hour of trying to find our way home, I started to cry. It felt like we were going in circles, and I was sure we would end up as missing people, but fortunately found a trail that led us back home. I think it was this day that something from the land attached itself to me. Soon after the incident in the woods, I started to feel oppressed by something very dark. I started doing things that was really out of character for me, like binge drinking and picking fights. I would almost go into a trance, and from what my husband tells me, I'd run out into the forest and disappear for hours during
Ko
fights,
balandį
even late
nemiegi.
at night. I'd have no recollection of this. I only remember standing in front of our house late at night, with cut-up bare feet and being confused and disoriented. My husband would be upset and tell me he had been frantically looking for me for hours, but it never seemed to me as if any time had passed.
Garsai netrukdo.
I got a job working at a local church camp. I'm not super religious, but jobs up there are scarce, and I noticed that the only time I felt normal was while I was at work. I felt like I was having some kind of internal battle between good and evil. While I spiraled down at home, I got diagnosed with a severe illness that no doctor could really explain, was constantly in the hospital, and put on heavy narcotics which only aggravated my spiral downwards. We seemed to be having really bad luck too. For instance, one time my husband was driving in a really remote part of the mountain when his car broke down. So I jumped in my car to go fetch him when suddenly my car blew a gasket clean through the hood, which no mechanic had ever seen or could explain. I had to hitchhike to where my husband was, and we had to tow both cars. My husband's car mechanically had nothing wrong with it at all, and it worked just fine after we towed it. Yet it would always break down periodically, and always in a remote part of town with no cell service, as we lived way off the beaten path deep in the woods. Something always seemed to go wrong. Just before things could go wrong, I'd get that creepy feeling with my hair, where it stood on end, and the feeling of electricity in the atmosphere. As things progressed one day after drinking and taking pills, I remember feeling pulled out into the forest. I went stumbling through the woods, sobbing and having an overwhelming urge to end myself. I kept thinking that this was the only way out. This was a common thing I started doing, and it was as if I was only in some kind of trance. I remember constantly feeling paralyzed with fear, sorrow, and despair. I began to feel like my true self was gone, and I couldn't get out.
Nebeprisikiškė kopų
I began to
steliaudamasis.
feel numb, regardless of how much I was unraveling at home. I still functioned at work and even managed to get a few promotions. I felt like I had two personalities. Around this time, weird things started happening in the house. It would start with electrical feelings, goosebumps, and then bam, all the lights and ceiling fans would turn on full blast on their own. I'd come home from work and think someone was in our house because all the lights would be on. One time I was sleeping, and I could hear the remote control button for fan speed clicking on, and then all the lights turned on as well as the fans. I would get out of bed and yell, "Stop it!" and hide the remotes for the fans and TVs. But it started taunting me. It would turn on all the electronics late at night. Or any time I was laying in a room, feeling depressed. It was like I knew that that would push me over the edge. Around this time we felt an oppressive presence, like it was watching us sleep. It was only then that what had been causing these problems revealed itself to me. There was a small wooden door in our bedroom that led to the attic, and one night I had a nightmare that felt incredibly real, of watching myself sleep from a different angle in the room, when a pure black demon, with tight black, shiny skin, red eyes, and a golden head with giant horns came out the door, and was crouching down, watching me sleep by my bedside, while breathing what looked like smoke around my body. As it stood up and reached for me with its long pointy fingers, I suddenly woke up, choking in a panic. I looked over, and the attic door was open. Now that door was extremely hard to open, and you had to really tug at it due to it not fitting quite right and running against the door frame. Because it was cold, creepy, and drafty up there. Terrifying. After that, I dreaded going to sleep, and would often stay up all night drinking and descending. No matter where I was, I always had the sensation of being watched, but I was too afraid to sleep, especially in our room. When all the electronics would turn on, when I'd get goosebumps, I knew the demon was near. It really scared me, but I knew what it looked like, and I could feel its presence. Things at work eventually got weird too, and I could barely function. I felt like I was hanging on by a thread. I was an emotional wreck, and in heavy counseling, heavy drinking, and pill popping. My relationship was on the rocks, and I had become a regular.
Kurva, kai vidinis balsas, o prieš kažką blogo
I
darant.
was completely out of control, and was beginning to get evil, intrusive thoughts. One night, I was in a rage and picked a fight with my husband. I don't remember it, but the next day,
Prie
when I
pusę
was
keturių
feeling
žaidimą rado.
after he threatened to leave, he told me I didn't even look like myself, that my eyes and
Eta
face
John
looked
1
dark,
pabraukimo brūkšnys
evil,
Phoenix 94 grynai black.
Then he told me I had shot my heart shut to a million pieces. I'm not an angry or violent person at all normally. That broke me. I couldn't stop acting that way though, no matter how hard I tried. I hated myself.
Kai vaikai buvo negalintys užmigti prieš mokyklą. Tai kokiu dar čia yra garsų.
Yra parašyta ant ekranų.
Tiesiai ją daryt reikia.
Ant ekranų yra parašyta dovanėlių garsai.
She had a friend that also had moved up there after a divorce and experienced a similar oppression, and fled home in the middle of the night taking only her animals. She'd seen something that she refuses to talk about. It clicked right then. Whatever was up there was evil and affecting me deeply. I broke down and begged my husband to leave. He's the type to do anything for me, so we both started job hunting in the town we wanted to move to, and he listed the house for sale. The second I got hired, I threw some clothes and my dog in the car and never looked back. Luckily, our home sold pretty quickly.
Too easy to learn. With my Minecraft pickaxe and shovels, hopefully they stay.
Jonai, nu.
Back to normal. At first, there was still some
Ačiū.
activity like the demonic dreams, and one time being awoken by something that felt like a pillow hitting
No,
me with a
Black.
crazy force across the face. But after I had a cleansing done by a Ricky master, it mostly stopped, and I completely lost any desire to
Kurwa.
drink and switched medications to a non-narcotic. I've never been a drinker, and to this
Balsu.
day I have, on average, 1 or 2 beers
Atsiminkit,
a
yra
year.
dar tik toko
My
kepurė
personality
ir
went back to my
galaxis.
happy, loving self.
Sorry, Raminta.
The dark thoughts seemed like a bizarre memory. My marriage is solid, and we are like any boring couple. After months of moving, we did receive a call from the company.
Let's get high.
Telling them
Ačiū.
it was never the home.
Raminta, dėkui.
It was like a horrible
Johannes,
nightmare that
dėkui.
creeps me out just sharing the
Ačiū.
story. I even avoid talking or
Nu,
thinking
bul.
about it due to weird
Nes
feelings
kaimas
it gives me.
prabus.
I feel like part of my
Net
soul
prabus,
is gone
vienkiemis.
forever.
Eta John 1 pabraukimo brūkšnys Phoenix
What I put my poor
94.
husband through. I'll never view things the same.
Nu, ble.
I know there is real evil out there, and I want it, my soul. In the late spring of 2014, I made the long
O kodėl
insane
Mikus
trek
ne
from
visus
Kansas
įgarsina?
to Arizona. It
Parukom.
was in early May.
Įgarsina,
After packing up an apartment
jeigu
with
norit, kad
way
visą
more
laiką
than enough
įgarsintų,
stuff for
prisijunkit
2
prie
people,
šeimos.
we
Nu, už
moved
vieną monetą,
ourselves
kur yra
from
ta
the
širdutė
flatlands
virš
and
galvos.
wheat fields of eastern Kansas to the high desert of
Tada
Arizona.
įgarsina, nes
After
įgarsina
everything was
donatorių
packed into the box
ir tų
truck,
žmonių, kurie
and the
yra
car was
prisijungę prie
secured
komandos.
onto the pull-behind
Čia
cargo,
apsauga nuo vaikų.
I started the 1,500 plus mile trip for the first time. I had never been
Tai
further
aš
west
prisijungiau.
to Colorado prior to that
Jo,
particular
jo, jo.
trip, as I was born and raised between the Midwest and the
Su
eastern side
širdele.
of the United States.
Jo, su širdele, su
Little
širdele.
did I know, I would make the drive again a year later to collect the belongings we left behind at the cabin when we'd abandoned it.
Vo,
I'll never forget driving
dėkui,
through
kad prisijungi prie
Colorado,
komandos.
Utah,
Nu,
New
bandau.
Mexico, and Arizona. There was just something about that part of the country, that specific region, that just is flat out magical to me.
O
And
mano
apparently
vis tiek
I'm not the only
neįgarsina.
one who feels this way.
Įgarsina, įgarsina.
If you've never been, I suggest you do if you ever get the chance. The first evening,
Ramintos
when I arrived
negarsina
in
Niko
Arizona,
vis tiem.
the sun had already gone down as I made my way off the main highway about
Mm.
40 miles from the Grand Canyon.
Jonai, pažymėk mane.
Through the well-worn dirt
Ne, ne, ne,
roads
ta
that
prasme,
led out across the
tuos
desert
visus,
and towards the
kai
cabin
eta
that
yra,
I would be renting for the next several
ne
months.
visą laiką vardus
I
skaito.
didn't know much about the cabin before my arrival.
Kai, pavyzdžiui,
other
vardas
than it
yra,
was
Va, bandau.
supposed to be entirely
kai vardas yra
self-sufficient,
sudėtas iš
with a
dviejų dalių,
500-gallon
pavyzdžiui,
water tank and 4
e,
full-sized solar
pavyzdžiui,
panels,
jeigu dabar
including
patagintum
areas for gardening,
Johannes
walking trails,
Phoenix
RV pads,
94, tai
and that the
perskaitytų
nearest
tik
town
tai
was located
Phoenix
several miles away.
94. Čia
In
tokia
addition,
programa
the
yra.
world's
Biškį
largest
keista.
stretch of ponderosa pine forest, 1.8 million acres, was situated
leisit
just 10
Eta John
miles
1 pabraukimo brūkšnys
in
Phoenix
the Pakomentuokite
94.
forest.
Ai,
This particular
nesenau tas
national
Tai
forest
mane
is
pilnai
something
garsina.
I've been very much
Aš
looking
nežinau šitos
forward to
programos,
explore.
nesuprantu.
It was in this area
Kai kurios
of the
vardus
expanse
skaito, kai
of
kurių vardų
ponderosa
blet
pine
neskaito.
forest that I first saw a wild wapiti, Native
Nu,
American,
svarbiausia, aš
etc.
girdžiu jūsų komentarus.
In actuality, there
oh,
were 3 of them, each one massive.
Let's get high.
Let
Dėkui.
alone 3
Ačiū.
large and picturesque balls like this. I
Aš
wish I had been
nepavydžiu
able
žmonėm,
to take
kurie
a picture
mėgina užmigti su mano laivu.
Šokam.
I saw
Шагом,
several more while I
шагом.
was in the area over the course of the next
Yeah.
However, I never did see any more that were so large,
Čia
or with such tall racks as those
Nepavydžiu ir aš.
wapitis from the first night. Being somewhat of a mystic, I instantly took
nepavydžiu
it as
pats
an
sau.
extremely excellent sign to see such impressive stags so close to the cabin. Space for the full moon and crescent moons, using the red rocks found
Esu aš matęs tavo dovanomus non-stop. Aš pamėgau jį žmogus su nemiega.
Reserved for the altar, I extended the stone pathway to a full circle that I created for meditation and metaphysical workings. I raked and smoothed the working circle, the center of the circle rather, cleaning it of all debris and broken stone until it was the same consistency of a child's sandbox. Next,
Reikia kaip garso tos TikTok dainelės. Miau, 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 miau.
one stone from all four directional directions, and I placed the large bulky stones according as
gerai, viskas
capstones to
baigiam
my
dabar.
working circle. Once the circle was complete, I extended the red rock inlay of my sanctuary floor from where it ended slightly beyond the altar, all the way
Reik
to the
užpamint
working
rožytėm.
circle between the circle with the altar and the working circle.
Sėkmės
I
ražyčiai, aš jau
made another full
nebegirdžiu.
moon with 2 crescent moons, the sign of the triple goddess into the wall.
Kartais aš tiesiog
Each
marinu man
morning when
žmogų
I would
sumeta po
meditate,
kokios
facing the
20
east,
rožyčių
sitting in the middle
ir
of
tik
my
tai vėliau tik tai
circle,
pamatau ir
as the
sakau,
sun
ble,
rose
dėkui,
over
net
the
negirdėjau.
desert. When
Aš
I
kartais
could feel the
nebegirdžiu ugų.
warmth of the sun begin to warm my inner eye, only then was
Eta
my
John
morning
1
meditation
braukimo
ritual.
brūkšnys Phoenix 94 man
I
patiko labai
repeated these
kepurė.
meditations throughout the day by meditating in the correlating directions of the sun at noon and again directly before sunset as well. In all honesty, I would have to say that I've never been so in tune with myself. That said, I constantly have the feeling of eyes upon me. I cannot
Let's get high.
strange thing to
Dėkui.
try and convey to something else.
Dėkui, dėkui,
I
dėkui.
suppose those feelings are similar to those of a hunter who spent years hunting and tracking prey. After a while, they are able to develop a sixth sense and able to feel when something is watching them. That's how I felt. I've heard Native Americans describe the same feeling before. I know it's cliché, that you have the feeling that someone's watching you. That's
Per trumpas šokis mes su Raminta net neįsivažiuojam į šokį.
and it never went away. Some Native Americans proclaim it to be a thin veil between the worlds, and that the ancients inhabiting the other side can see through it, but that most people are very much unaware of its existence. I'm sure that many of the strange occurrences that I experienced during my
Eta
time
John 1 braukimo brūkšnys Phoenix 94 nublet grynai. Tik pradedu šokti ir pasibaigia jau.
Spending 3 days of building my sacred space was an experience that I will always remember and cherish. Actively using the area is another experience that I will never forget. That said, many strange things happened there. One day I was hiking through the adjacent desert hills surrounding the cabin. I ventured further away from the property by at least a couple of miles further than usual, and I came across a massive skull of what I could only assume was a longhorn deer. However, it immediately reminded me of the great white buffalo that is sacred to so many Native American nations. The skull was enormous and had 2 large horns coming out of it, as well as being completely covered in thick snow and white fur.
Let's get high.
Wow.
back and forth over the top of my car. Please try to imagine a long and lonely stretch of road through the heart of the
Aš
four
planuoju
corner region,
užsisakyti
where there
programos
is little
premiumą
water, hardly any
ir
trees at all,
uždėti visą
and is
visų
uninhabited.
garsų.
There are no cars on the road
Visų
for
dovanėlių
miles
garsus.
and miles. I don't recall passing even a single car on that particular stretch of road that night also, though I had to traverse it for several hours.
Kelintą dieną jie yra Mikulinės.
Blet, čia idėja tikrai.
A large shadowy
Yeah.
figure started swooping around back and forth over my car. At first I
Kelintą
thought
dieną
it was a bat
Mikulinės.
of some kind or a nocturnal bird,
Aš pažiūrėsiu.
but I wasn't aware as much. I was still new to the southwestern region of the United States at the time.
Nes reikia
I really didn't
susitaupyti.
think much about it and just kept driving.
Nes blet su tais.
However, I was taking the car over 100 miles per hour, and to my complete horror, the dark, winged figures were still keeping up with my vehicle, like it was no problem at all. Perhaps 10 minutes into this bizarre situation,
Atadžiau vienas tas pabraukimo brūkšnys Phoenix 94 zinuk pasileidau plaukus.
120, and eventually decided to slow the car down to the creeping speed of 15 miles per hour. I was barely moving at this point, but nothing changed. Not knowing what exactly to think or expect, I merely resumed the speed limit, maybe 5 to 10 miles above it, for the remainder of this road.
Sūnus nemėgosi balandį, nebent mes užmigsim.
Aš dabar supratau, kad jūs, karočią,
Through only at least
vieno
30
kito
miles.
pusę
However,
per
it could
pusę.
probably be a bit more. After that terrifying
Phoenix levelį iš viso man
I
net
finally
nerodo.
came across an eatery, made a pit stop to take a bite, and noticed that over the road there was an Navajo museum. This caught my attention.
Oi,
I
sorry,
finished my food excitedly and got out to explore the Navajo collection. The
dabar
entire
rodo.
thing was dedicated to the Navajo people,
Nu, na,
as
tai.
those lands even now belong to their nation. A whole area was a
Išsijung geriau,
Navajo reservation,
išsijung.
and even the
Jeigu mes nemiegam, nemiegosi ir tu.
with the winged shadows flying over the top of my car for miles.
Panašaus lygio kaip ir aš esi.
The museum
Tai kad mano
wouldn't amount to much
lygis
for
yra
the
ant
average
9
person,
mažesnis.
I'm sure. I highly doubt that it received much attention. I myself spent the better half of an hour
Paslėpiau kainardau po TikToką.
and reading each
Jo,
plaque
teisingai.
in detail. Each display was filled with basic things, tools, mock dwellings, and other art.
Bet žinot, su to leveliu pasakysiu tiek,
The place explained a great deal about the Navajo people
kaip ką
and
aš
how they
norėjau
managed to
sakyti.
survive in such a harsh landscape.
Visi labai pradeda kreipti dėmesį, kai prisijungia didelį lygį žmogus, blėt.
I ran across a hitchhiker. It was not only the first hitchhiker I'd seen on the trip, it was in fact the first person
Levelis čia kaip karūna.
aside from the pit stop. I started slowing down as soon as I passed him. I noticed how heavy his gear was, and also took note of how he appeared to be Native American. Pulling over to the side of the road, my car came to a stop 50 yards or so ahead of the man. I watched him through my rear view mirror as he hunkered down and began running, when he'd realized that I was stopping for him. I
Norėčiau
asked if he
palaukyti.
needed a ride, to which he replied in
Nežinau.
affirmative.
Kokie čia reiškia 1 eur,
And
2
told me
bilietukai.
he was going in the same direction I was.
Ten į PayPalą
And that
dariau,
he
aš
just needed to lift the first 30 miles.
jūsų vardus
Parukom.
I jumped out,
Jūsų
threw the
vardus
stuff
į
in the
notepad.
trunk,
Vien nuo to, kad prisijungia aukštas, nespėjai pabėgti,
and took off
jau labutis
with my
iškart.
passenger. Over the next half hour, we shared some lovely conversations. I found out he was full-blooded
Aš rašau
Navajo
vardus.
and went by the
Parukom.
Christian
Į notepadą.
name Raymond. He was well known
Kas
in the
meta
area,
kepurės
so he claimed.
ir kas įmeta į PayPalą, parašau dvigubai. Dabar aiškiai esu pristabdęs tą visą konkursą. Bet tiesiog aš, biškį vėliau pradėsiu biškį normaliai pataupyti iš TikTok'ų ir atiduosiu žmonėm 40% tą, ką aš gausiu. Tai apytiksliai pirmas iki, kai darėm konkursą, atidavėm žmogui 170 eurų ir vėliau išdalinom beveik po 100 eurų tiems žmonėm. Mes per 10 dienų atidavėm per 10 dienų atidavėm beveik 500 eurų. Bet į sąskaitą mes pervedom. Mes vedam į sąskaitas, neduodam dovanėlėm.
Raymond had explained to me how his previous gear had recently been ruined due to certain circumstances. So after a tiny bit of coaxing, he graciously accepted. What happened next was one of the strangest things. By the time I left Raymond with his gear and doubled back around onto the highway,
Bet ir savęs neskriausk už
I had a
pastangas.
clear view of where I had just left.
Tai dabar esu, matai, dėl tai esu dabar biškį pristabdęs,
There
kad
was no
galėčiau
way possible
pasitaupyti.
within this short amount of time, Raymond and all the
Nes-
Tai
gear
tu čia ne vienas vis tiek visą šitą reikalą suki.
had vanished. He couldn't have walked off
Ta
very
prasme,
far
ne
in
vienas.
any direction, and it was fairly visible everywhere. I feel that it's important to take a moment to mention that during our conversation, because of my genuine liking for this man, as well as recognizing the hardship he was currently facing in life, I offered him an open invitation to come and stay on the property that I was renting any time that he made his way out. There was a second cabin, albeit much smaller, which had previously been occupied by another home. He'd been a friend of the woman who owned the land, and quite frankly, he was also a man that I rather enjoyed having a conversation with, the few times that I had the pleasure. However, I find it critical to mention this open invitation was for a reason.
Iš šono kas nors padeda vis tiek. Ar vienas čia tai visi bomžpakiai susimi ir kitą?
As well as directions as to how to get there from the
Ne,
nearest
ta prasme,
town,
mes
Williams, Arizona.
pasidarom
Having grown up in
tikslus,
the region and being 50-something years old,
pasidarom
I'm
tikslus,
sure it wouldn't take him long to find
užsimetu,
there. That
kiek
same
pavyzdžiui
night,
surinkti
extraordinarily upsetting things began to
tų
take place
eurų,
in the cabin.
surenkam ir
For the
darom.
first time since being there, which at this point had been several weeks, I heard coyotes for the first time. Previously I had heard them far off in the distance, but never near the actual property. I hadn't found their tracks around the place either. I thought it was a bit strange that they didn't seem to be cutting through the property,
Dažniausiai vis tiek
as it
mes
was several acres
pasidarom
wide,
tokias
being
nesąmonės,
15 acres.
kad atsipirkti tiesiog.
Near the surrounding properties, which were much more extensive. There were plenty of rabbits and small game near the cabin. I kicked them up daily. when I
Pasidirbau
looked around
kainų,
the place.
tiesiog, kad
However, at the
bomžpakiai
time,
atsipirkti ir
I
viskas.
had much bigger issues to worry about than why coyotes were
Net už kelią, kurio čia dar
The night
nepriskaičiavau
after I
nieko.
returned from my
Nes man iš kaimo, vien tik iš kaimo į miestą ir iš miesto į kaimą, pirmyn atgal kainuoja 40 eurų.
The coyote tracks around the cabin. I didn't think very much of it, as I had obviously heard them. I knew that they had been there. However, the next morning was a different story altogether. That night, the coyotes returned to run circles around the house for what seemed to be half the night. Almost no sooner had my head hit the pillow did I hear the footsteps of what sounded like a rather large pack running around it. Not long after, I began to hear their heavy footfalls pounding through hard-packed earth around the cabin. They continued yipping and yapping for some time. That's right around the time I was once again reaching the rationalization that maybe they had driven another poor
Aš žodžiu, geras irgi galvos skausmas čia pas tave.
find any fern or blood, or indicators that they had actually found one, or
Čilas,
eaten it.
čilas.
This is when I hear a clear
Bet
and
smagu
distinct
vis tiek.
sound. Claws on the door. The way that this particular cabin is set up, or was at the time at least, the entire upstairs floor stretched the length of the cabin, and was set up as the only bedroom in the place.
Ai, žinok,
I had
kartais
set
būna.
up my bed in a particular
Miegi,
area,
miegi,
which
miegi.
was located on top
Tik
of the
miegi.
garage,
Yra
and the
tokių
headboard
momentų,
was directly
pats
above the
tas
wooden
nervingiausias
sideboard
momentas,
which
kai
led into the garage.
tik
This was
guli
also the
lovoje
main
kokią
entrance to
valandą
the
laiko
cabin,
užmerkęs akis,
as
kad tik
the other
užmigti.
two entrances
Pagaliau
were
O, bet tu nedarai.
automatic garage
Įmiegi
door, which made no
ir
sense
karočią tave
in those
pažadina.
cases.
Kokią
To get
3
into
valandą
the
nakties.
cabin. and a set of double glass sliding doors.
Gerai, kad dabar spėjau pamiegoti. Ne, aš betlų nelabai dirbu. Aš labai retai, kada betlais dirbu. Su kuo dažniausiai pasijungiu, tai su Kamilė ir Čiūžinė. Reikės man su Bensiku dar
Čia kaip mes Elę pažadinom.
Ne, čia dar jūs dar nieko, viskas normaliai. Yra ir blogiau, sakai, kai tik įmiegi. Bet dažniausiai jo pasižadinant su man 3, 4, 5 valandą ryto. Nežinau, aš kartais mėginu kartais su betlu eiti, bet labai retai, žiauriai retai. Aš net į langelį nieko nepriimu. Nes norint daryti betlus, aš turiu pasijungti laivą per telefoną, o jeigu pasijungi laivą per telefoną, manęs vis klausinėja, kiek valandų liko. Gerai, pažiūrėjom, kas čia pas mane žmonės kokie miega. Rokė, nesvarbu, aha, Gerdose, Žilvinas, DDR. Tas visą laiką čia miega, Kauno meras visą laiką pas manęs miega, Katinukas pas manęs miega. Ačiū Spurga.
Consisted mainly of meditating in my outdoor sanctuary
Ryžas,
and the returning to the cabin
kūdas.
shortly after sunrise to prepare coffee and then relax outside near a large raised bedstone circled garden where I would then feed the 3 ravens, Edgar, Alan and Poe, the latter of which would behave
Didžioji dalis miega.
Didžioji dalis miega.
day after day.